Hey guys, this is Melody, and today we're going to play with some new watercolors that I got at the Blick art store that I found in Seattle during PAX. These are the Kuretake watercolors, and this is the 24 set. It costs about $38 before tax, which isn't horrible, but I think you might be able to find it cheaper on eBay or maybe Amazon. But I was there, and I was ready to spend some money on art supplies. The first thing that I think is important to note here is that the lid for these watercolors is actually a swatch sheet. However, I don't think they used the highest quality paper. It doesn't really feel like watercolor paper, it feels like just kind of cheap paper. So you get the colors on there, but the texture's a little bit weird. But it is still really nice to be able to see the colors, as some of the ones on the bottom, the blues and purples and whatnot, they kind of look all the same, so it's really helpful to look at those swatches, and because it is a part of the case, I feel like it'll be a lot harder for me to lose than a piece of paper. Secondly, it came with a clear plastic sheet thing that was over the paints, which I believe was there to just protect the paints, but it works really well to mix paints in. It is see-through though, so if you lay it down on a white paper or something, it does help so you can see the colors a little bit more accurately. So I do believe that these watercolors are supposed to be in the same kind of range as the Winsor & Newton or Daler-Rowney watercolors. They're priced about the same, but I did want to get a bigger set because I have never had watercolors that have colors like this. I've only ever gotten like an 8-pack or something like that, so I've never been able to experiment with the fun colors. I've always just had to mix everything, and I thought it might be enjoyable to have something a little bit different. Anyhow, these are in that kind of same range. This is the third watercolor palette that I've ever owned, unless you consider really cheap ones that I had in school, and even then they were the school's, not mine. I feel like I do have to give a little bit of a disclaimer with these paints, because when I was reading about them in the store, it does say that they can be used as a gouache. So if you don't add a lot of water, they're not very see-through, they're actually quite opaque. And I did actually do a painting before this one, and I really did not like the way it came out. At some point I'll probably do a sketchbook tour and you'll see it. I think I just wasn't really in the mindset to create art that day. I was impatient and I was just kind of throwing paint at it and kind of just, I guess, seeing what this could do. But because I'm so used to doing watercolors at this point, it was kind of weird to me how opaque they could get, and I didn't like it. At some point I might try to intentionally use these for their opaqueness, and to some extent I did, because I tried to do as much of this in watercolor and use as little colored pencil as possible. So a lot of the lines I actually did do in the watercolor, and I didn't add very much water, so they were relatively opaque. But most watercolors, like Winsor & Newton stuff, while you can build up their opacity by adding more of the watercolor and less paint, it is not as opaque as these, and it seems like these can get a little bit chalky once you build up that opacity. I did buy myself some gouache, but it's not something that I've played around with a whole lot, so I'm not sure how that texture compares to gouache, but it is something to be aware of if you're looking into buying these paints. From what I was reading, these paints are intended to have that opacity, and that's kind of a Japanese style versus the European and American watercolors, which are meant to be more see-through and more use the light of the paper. So they're worth experimenting with to see if that's kind of the thing that you want to play around with, but just be aware that they are going to feel and act differently than American or European watercolors that you might be used to using. So there is a little bit of a curve here when it comes to learning how to use them. They do work very similarly to other watercolors, but if you do add the white to it, I felt like it added a little bit more opacity, and even if you added a lot of water, it was still pretty opaque. Though typically in traditional, like American, European watercolors, you don't use white. That's a big no-no. You also typically don't have a black, but you can buy them in tubes. So I don't know. I was not classically trained. I wasn't really trained at all. So this is all just from what I've heard other people say and my own experience. The paints overall, though, despite their tendency towards opacity, which is a little bit weird to me, do feel very nice. And in comparing them with the Winsor & Newton and Daler-Rowney, while I don't say they feel similar, I think they're worth the price. It's a good, definitely beginner set, and if you are trying to find something that can be used with both a watercolor and a gouache, maybe these could work. I'm not really sure. Like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with gouache. Hopefully I will soon, because I did find myself some at Blick though. So some of these colors also just tend to be a little bit chalky, typically the darker ones, but I feel like that's pretty typical for cheaper paints, and then especially because these are meant to be a little bit more opaque. I can't talk today, sorry. That might lend itself towards a little bit more chalkiness, I'm not sure. But overall, honestly, if you're trying to find some affordable paints to use, I think these are great. So to the actual painting, I did use a reference photo because I've been trying to draw more faces and more things from reference and then stylizing them a little bit. That way I can work on getting my anatomy and being able to translate things from real life into a style, I guess. Not that I'm going for a particular style, but as much as I love realism, it takes forever, and I don't always want to do realism. Sometimes I want to do something a little bit simpler like this. So this is, I guess it's a little bit cartoony. It is somewhat stylized, and my intention for this painting, because these paints are more opaque, was to do as much of this painting as possible without watercolors. So I tried to use the paint as much as I could for the line work and for shading, and in the end I did go through with a little bit of colored pencil just to add some accents, add a little bit of pink to her nose and her cheeks, add a little bit of shadow, make her lips redder, but this is the first piece that I've really done that didn't rely heavily on adding colored pencil after, and so I'm really proud of that, but it's definitely something I'm still working on. Let me know what medium is your guys' favorite and what your favorite things to draw are. That about sums it up for today, but I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, hit that bell so you'll be notified when I upload, and I'll see you guys in the next one.